Hey everyone, today we're looking over the complete unwritten rules of Dead by Daylight. The rules that many follow yet go unspoken, a silent agreement amongst the player base. Let's get into it. If it glows, it goes. This is one of the most ancient rules of them all and relates to hex totems. If you see a glowing totem as a survivor, or a hex, it's got to go. You have to go and break it. This was originally set as a clear rule due to all the hexes being negative, and so if you broke them as a survivor there was no downside. It was only with time this rule was put more into question with the addition of perks such as Hex Haunted Ground with the Spirit, a hex which acts as a sort of trap, exposing all survivors when broken. Even with this perk existing though, the rule has remained strong, and despite the small possibility of a downside, if it glows, it goes. If someone nods, nod back. This has become polite etiquette in the realm. If someone nods at you, whether it's a survivor or a killer, you nod back at them. This is largely done simply because it looks really funny, and can often be a nice bonding moment between opposing sides. Especially if done with good comedic timing, or in relation to a strange moment that's just happened in game. Nodding is one of few ways the two sides of survivor and killer can communicate at all, and so it's nice and polite to always nod back. Boop the snoot. This is our first rule that exists only for one killer, which is the pig. This rule simply goes that if a pig remains crouched and repeatedly growls at you, she's inviting you to crouch down and boop or point at the end of her snoot. This is done as a nice moment of connection usually, or often if a pig wants to be friendly during a match. This rule, although originally just being for pig, has developed over the years I'd say to encompass many other killers. If a killer wants to make friends with a survivor, they may show they're friendly by inviting them in for a boop, or a smack of some kind. Regardless of the action being a point or a beckon, if done close by to the killer, it's usually regarded as a friendly gesture, or sometimes a slightly sus one, maybe too. What are you slapping there? Respect someone doing a glyph. This rule regards a very specific part of the game, but it's one that has weirdly gained a ton of traction despite this. In the archives you can equip challenges which spawn glyphs into the trials. These require you to pause in the match and perform an action which causes you to stand still for a brief period of time. This rule simply goes that if a survivor is doing a glyph, as a killer, you let them. You wait for them to be done and then continue the chase. It's good for the survivor to also allow the killer to hit them once before they continue on, as a sort of trade-off. When a killer finds a glyph mid-chase, it usually isn't reciprocated by survivors to stop where they are, but some people definitely do this too, and it would be nice if this was done more. I think people have largely done this over the years, as glyph challenges can be frustrating and take a long time to complete, so if you can help someone, you do. I'd also say people do this in general for most actions where you require a bit of help, say for achievements. There's a tough one at the moment where you have to grab people whilst moving through the security office as Springtrap. If you notice a Springtrap wants to farm these, it's nice to sometimes just help them out. We're all in the belly of this emotion-sucking elder god forever, so, you know, be kind. Stare for effect. This rule is not too dissimilar from the nodding rule, but instead happens in situations where one side has embarrassed themselves in some way. For example, if you miss a head-on, then the killer may simply stare at you, making you feel the embarrassment of missing it. Or on the flip side, a trapper walking into his own trap may cause a survivor to stare at him. It's always best when you're being stared at to let them stare at you. Either stare back, or maybe turn away in embarrassment, or even just leave completely. Any of these things are viewed as acceptable, and are frequently done on both sides. This can also extend to shaking your head too, I think. Although this is more for if someone does something toxic, you might shake your head as well as stare, depending on the situation. Match outfits when you can. This rule refers to whenever you join a lobby as a survivor. If you see there's 2 or more survivors with matching outfits, or playing the same character, then you can join them by switching to the character or corresponding outfit. This is done typically just for fun. Say you join into a match with a bunch of Dwights wearing crazy outfits, then you switch to Dwight and put on your craziest outfit. This can't really be done on the killer side, unfortunately, but I suppose you can do your best to try and match survivors when possible. It's a fairly decent strategy for the survivor side too, as it generally does confuse the killer if all of you look the same or very similar. This is especially fun I find in 2v8 when you can coordinate up to 8 people wearing very similar outfits, or coordinate so you will play as Resident Evil characters, for example. It can be a lot of fun. Whoever's not doing something goes for the save. This is a survivor rule and is simply about how to coordinate as a team. If someone is hooked and 2 people are on gens but the third isn't, then the person not on the gen goes for the save, and the other 2 stick the gens. This is another etiquette type of rule where you're essentially just doing the most efficient thing possible. The rule is really about looking at the HUD and trying to be a good teammate. This rule can also vary depending on the progress of gens. If all unhooked survivors are working on gens, then the person with the least gen progress goes for the save. It's that type of thing. Basically just try and do the most efficient thing possible when you can. I think that's basically the rule, really. Let survivors go if you dominate them, and give yourself up to the killer if you stomp them. This is a two-sided rule centered around dominating lobbies. If you looped for 5 gens, say, as survivor, or you completely swept as killer, then you take pity on the other side and give in to them in some way. As a survivor, you may mess around with the killer and stay with them during the endgame collapse, choosing to die. As a killer, you may decide to simply let someone go if the team really struggled, choosing to throw them a bone a bit and not wipe the entire team. This is a much more flexible rule, I'd say, though, and changes depending on the person you talk to, who will have varying ideas about when it's fair game to give in or give up to the other side if you've played well. Get into Ghostface's selfie. This rule goes that if Ghostface is performing a Mori, you get into the camera shot behind him. This is simply another rule set because it's funny. It's really part of a more general rule too though, which is that if a killer is performing a Mori, get into the shot in some way and mess around by teabagging or waving or whatever. Sometimes it's done to send a message to the killer of discontent, other times it's done simply for a bit of fun, as Moris are generally a unique and fun interaction that doesn't happen that often, so it's always worthwhile to make the most of it. If you're toxic, I can be too. This is a rule as old as time and one that spans pretty much any online game. Aim to always play without being toxic to the other side, whether that's teabagging, flashlight clicking, or beckoning as a survivor, or face camping, hitting on hook, or hard tunneling as killer. These things should try to be avoided at all costs. If you do decide you want to do any of these toward the other side, you have to accept that they're allowed to be toxic back. The idea with this rule is basically just play without toxicity, but if someone is toxic to you, then you get a free pass to do it back. Obviously, if everyone followed this, there would be no toxicity. However, I do think a lot of people do follow this. I don't want to be toxic, but if you make me, then I will be, that kind of thing. Again, a rule I think that applies more generally to gaming communities as a whole. I think a lot of people go by this in just any game almost. If the killer drops you at the start of the exit gate, they want a slug race. This rule has been one that has evolved over the years. A slug race is a race between slug survivors, which begins at the start point of the exit gate and ends at the exit itself. The idea being that all 4 survivors begin crawling after the killer swings their weapon, racing to the exit. The etiquette here is to simply follow along if you get the chance. If the killer seems to want a slug race, then let them have one, and do it, play along basically. Oftentimes killers will do this too after they've unequivocally won, but want to throw the survivors a bone a bit, and so make them race to the exit, maybe even moriing the person who comes in last. That can be pretty funny. Don't open Basement Bubba's chest. This is a simple rule, it's Bubba's chest, leave it alone. Don't take your anger out on the next game. This is a rule that people do say a lot, but it definitely isn't followed as much as the others, I think. This rule goes that you should aim to try and not take your anger out on the next survivors or killer you're facing just because of your previous match. If you just got destroyed by a flashlight Sabo squad, that doesn't mean next game you should run 4 slowdown and double Aries and tunnel everyone, and vice versa for survivors. You should do your best to take every game as an individual experience ultimately. They are disconnected from one another unless you literally happen to queue into the same match as that Sabo squad again, in which case tunnel them all, finish them all, do whatever you please. If you run in the killer's face, you get tunneled. This rule appeared ever since the addition of Base Kid Borrowed Time, a mechanic which gives you the endurance status for 10 seconds after being unhooked. This prevents you from being tunneled. However, and unfortunately, many use this instead as a means to get in the killer's face or even force you to hit them, slowing you down. The rule here is basically that if you do this, then it's fair game for you to be tunneled, because you're purposefully using a mechanic for a purpose it's not intended for. It's fair game to just get you out of the match if you do this. I think as a broader rule too, you can't complain about tunneling if you keep throwing yourself in the killer's vision. Don't get mad if you put yourself there. Give hatch if you pass it whilst carrying a survivor. This rule is an odd one, but one that has arisen over the years as a polite thing to do. If you down the last survivor and you decide to hook them instead of mooring them, if you happen to hear the hatch on the way to a hook, then you give them the hatch. It's this weird interaction where you intend to hook them, but if you hear that sound, then they're saved. I guess maybe it's a streak of guilt that the hatch is so close, yet they can't get to it, so you say, ah, fine. So many killers opt to throw the survivor a bone and let them go. In a similar way, during situations like this, we have our next rule. Stop wiggling if the killer swings. This rule is very simple. If you're being carried and the killer swings their weapon, it's assigned to stop wiggling because they're trying to find you hatch or something like that usually. If you continue to wiggle, then you die. If you stop, then you live. There are a select number of killers who will do this with bad intent though, knowing you'll stop wiggling and using it to their advantage, so it can be a bit risky. Let survivors finish their songs. This is maybe a more general rule for goofy actions that occur in trial, whether it's a survivor using one of the song perks, the lute or the tambourine, or whether it's a survivor using plot twist right in front of you, or something along those lines. Much like the Glyph one, you just let them finish, or you stare at them for a bit to appreciate them messing around. This one I do have to say though is definitely reliant on context. Sometimes survivors can do this just to try and get out of a situation, so context does matter here. If the survivor is clearly just doing it to be silly, maybe just watch along. If they're clearly doing it to buy their team time or halt their death, then maybe just get rid of them, and that's on them. If the killer was nice to you, leave your item at the exit. This is a nice rule I think that has appeared over the years as a means to literally almost gift the killer a present, a sign that the survivors appreciate the killer in some way for playing well or simply nicely and fair. Not tunneling, slugging, camping, whatever. If they played in a pretty clean way, then give your item up upon leaving. This can also be done in situations of pity as well. If the killer got slammed during the match, then take a bit of pity on them and give up your item as a sign of good faith. A little present back to them to let them know it's all going to be okay. Respect the 4%. This rule is maybe slightly outdated nowadays due to 4%'s kind of being slowly faded out from gameplay due to the changes made to self-unhooking. However, this rule encourages you as killer to allow the survivors to leave, or at least give them a bit of a head start if they manage to unhook themselves by means of a 4%, which is done by using the attempt self-unhook chances, which have a 4% chance to work. This being quite low, and so you respect the fact they managed it by letting them go for a bit. I don't think it's actually 4% anymore though. I think because you have to run a self-unhook perk now, the lowest it ever is like 8% or something I think. Either way, I'd still say this rule is pretty solidly part of the community's mindset. Go for the sandbagger, not the sandbagged. This is a rule as killer where if you're chasing a survivor and another survivor sandbags them, or gets in their way, causing them to go down, then you go for the sandbagger rather than the person who got sandbagged. There's plenty of cases where this happens, and killers generally do respect it too, because we've all been there, and it's very frustrating. I'd say this does broaden out to be a more general rule for killer, which is just being aware of who's doing what on the other side. If there's a player largely hiding, try and get them before the ones doing something, especially if there's only 2 left, for example, that kind of thing. Just being aware of what's happening. Always go back for the save if you can. This rule is to essentially just not be selfish during the endgame of a match. If a survivor is hooked and you have the ability to at least try and save them, you should always try. The exception to this being if there's absolutely no chance it works out without someone dying. As a general rule though, if you can, or if you can at least try, you should try and get everyone out of the match. I suppose that's what this is largely about. Always try and save the whole team as a survivor, as you're a team at the end of the day. Always say GG no matter what. This rule is a simple one, and another one which I'd say spans gaming more widely. This is just to sort of be polite and say GG when the match ends. Good game. This is often done to just signify you are happy with the match or you think it was fair. I think it's a good habit to get into, to always say it, and it generally means endgame chat will remain more positive, as it acts as a sort of blanketing compliment for everyone in the trial for being fair. Of course, the issue here is when people use this despite being super toxic all game, or doing something to intentionally annoy the other side. It can often be used almost as an insult, destroying someone horribly, then saying GG feels a bit insincere, so you kind of have to read the room with this one. If you make yourself unhookable, I'm not going to hook you. This rule largely relates to people running specific builds such as anti-hook builds with perks like boil over, where they purposefully go down in really high up areas where it's nearly impossible to hook them. If you've made it so you cannot be hooked, then you're gonna just get slugged instead, and you shouldn't complain about that. This rule more broadly represents similar situations like this too. If you've put yourself in a situation where you're forcing the other side to do something at their detriment, don't get mad when they don't do it, basically. Don't run perks or builds you don't enjoy using. This is a simple rule that I think most should follow, generally speaking. If there's a certain perk that really annoys you or you don't enjoy facing, then don't use it yourself. Don't add to the problem, basically. If you really hate facing Hex Ruin, say, then don't run that perk when you're on Killer. I do this personally with Lightborn. I literally never run this perk because I personally find it really boring as a survivor when I can't interact with the blinding mechanic at all, just because of that perk, and so I personally never run this. On the survivor side, it's probably stuff like Dead Hard or Off the Record, anything that causes the endurance status I know I find really annoying on Killer, so I barely ever run those. Dead Hard especially to me has always just felt like such a silly free perk to just take an extra hit, so I tend to not run that one. I'm sure everyone has that for one perk or another. Let me know what yours is down below. Treat all players as you'd like to be treated. Ah, what a wholesome rule to leave off on, and a rule you should all follow in real life too. This is ultimately what all of the unwritten rules of the game come down to, treating other people in the same way that you want to be treated when you enter a match. Most of these rules center around key mechanics or interactions where they're aiming to make the game as fair and as fun as possible by taking advantage of the silly moments of DBD, but also trying to iron out the imbalance and the annoying parts of it. The unwritten rules of DBD aim to fix these as best they can, and do generally make the game more fun, I think, if you follow them. If you choose not to, that's okay as well, as they're unwritten, and essentially are just a community-conscious effort to try and make the game more enjoyable, because most want it that way too. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know if there's any key rules I did miss down below. If you did enjoy today too, please consider subscribing, and drop a like if you didn't like it as well. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.